Hello, and welcome back to The Road to 2000. As always, I am your host, Caleb Denby. Today, I wanted to continue the kind of series I've been doing now on the Caro-Kann. Of course, in previous weeks, we took a look at the advanced variation as well as the exchange variation. I believe a long time ago, I covered some classical lines as well. Today, I wanted to go over the two knights variation in the Caro-Kann. And now this is kind of one that falls by the wayside for a lot of Caro-Kann players. They don't really analyze the two knights because they think it's just pretty similar to a lot of the stuff they already know. But you can run into some trouble if you don't know what you're doing, and there are some really fun lines if you take the time to study them. So I wanted to introduce you to some of those lines here today with a few main games, as well as talking about a lot of different variations within the lines that really illustrate the character of the positions. So why don't we just get started here? The first game I'm going to look at is between Pavel Pankratov against Alexander Shimunov. So of course, this game starts with the Caro-Kann. And now the main Caro-Kann variations all start with the move d4 here. But what we're going to look at today, the two knights, is aptly named because white, instead of playing d4, starts by developing, you guessed it, the two knights. And we've arrived in the two knights variation here. Now there are a lot of different moves that Caro players play here, and the top two most common moves I don't think are actually Black's best lines. And the reason they're the most common moves is because they're very Caro-like moves, and they get you into very Caro-like positions, but White does sometimes gain some things via this move order. So the most common move by far is Bishop g4, which is a very Caro-Kann style move. You just develop the bishop. And now, of course, White could transpose into some other lines with d4, and it would be a little bit weird. But here, White can actually play moves like h3, and you have to give up this bishop rather early. And so I don't really like the bishop g4 lines that much. You can also take on e4. White can take back. And now, unfortunately, the lines with bishop f5 aren't quite as good. For the reason that White has not committed to d4 yet, so these lines are all coming a little bit quicker on the king's side. So the line I'm actually going to recommend is pretty interesting, and I think it's the main reason why the two knights variation isn't the most common, especially at the top level. And the line I'm going to recommend actually starts with knight f6. And you might be thinking, well, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal here is that you're not allowing White to get into these typical Caro-Kann positions where he might have something to gain by delaying the push of d4. Instead, you are forcing the issue here with this pawn on e4. Now, really, the only line worth looking at here is going to be what happens when White pushes this pawn forward. This is really the only serious try for White. White can, of course, defend the pawn with d3 at the very least here. Black is going to be doing absolutely fine after this queen trade with perhaps even a slightly better endgame. White could also try a move like queen e2, but this move's just a little bit silly, and even the move d4 now for Black kind of illustrates that this is not really what White wants to be doing, pushing this knight all the way back to b2. So with that in mind, we're going to take a look at the main stuff after e5. Now, of course, it would be silly for Black to bring the knight to f6 and then back to g8, so the move is knight e4 here. Now I've drawn in very colorful arrows some of the main options here for White. Of course, White can push d4. This is a pretty common try. Let's see if I can get my colors right here. Yeah, d4. White can also play the strange-looking move knight e2, and that's actually what we're going to analyze first. And then there are some side moves like queen e2, bishop e2, h3 is playable. Even knight takes e4 we're going to take a look at eventually. But the main moves by far, d4 and knight e2. So in this line, we're going to take a look at knight e2 first. And this is a pretty multi-purpose move here. The main reason White plays the move knight e2 is to, of course, prevent knight takes c3. White is looking to highlight the fact that the black knight on e4 is perhaps a little bit stuck on that central square, perhaps just a little bit stuck. Now, if you play a natural-looking move like e6 here, just solidifying in the center, well, you're going to run into d3, knight c5, followed by d4. And if you bring this knight back to d7, well, what have you done? You've actually reached a French down a tempo. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the French, but it's not the kind of opening you really want to play down a tempo. Of course, you could get similar positions by playing knight f6 to d7, but we've already committed this pawn to c6, and this pawn is going to have to move to c5 anyways. In fact, you might be down like 2 tempi, but regardless, it's not worth playing. so you can't just play a simple move like e6. You can, but it's quite bad. So the line I'm recommending is queen b6. This is really the only main variation. Of course, queen b6 makes a threat. Now, the most popular way to respond with this is really d4, kind of the only move again, just stopping the queen from getting to f2. Well, what has black gained by this? Well, you've gotten rid of this annoying d3 line for 1 here. Now I'm going to recommend you simply play e6. You could theoretically try to develop this bishop, but you're really going to run into some problems after the move knight f to g1. This is actually pretty awkward for black. It looks like a very, very strange move, but the fact is your knight is simply trapped after the move f3, and you have a lot of problems to solve in the meantime. So instead of that, the move e6 comes to mind. Now from here, there are 2 main branches in our main variation here. There's knight g3, which is what I'm going to look at in the main variation of this game, but I also wanted to take a look at the move knight f g1 here. This is in fact a playable move, and in fact this has been played in many, many games, well over 100. Players like MVL have played it, Alexander Grishuk. And why don't we see what happened in this MVL game? He was actually playing against Vishy Anand. And this was actually from the 4th Sinquefield Cup in 2016, if you're curious. So, St. Louis game right here. The move for black is going to be to play f6. This is actually the only way to give your knight a square. Now, if white tries to be persistent and trap the knight on g5, well, you simply have takes on g5, takes on e5 rather. You cannot really recapture it due to this threat. And if f3 is still, well, your knight now has some squares. So h4 is ridiculous, can't play that. f3 is the main move. Now, of course, you gave your knight the g5 square. And e takes f6 is the natural continuation. G takes f6. Now f4 hits this knight again. And you can bring this knight to either of these squares. I'm going to recommend knight e4. And now knight g3 is the most common move for white, just trying to harass this knight a little bit. And after bishop d7, this knight can capture, takes c3. And now in this game between MVL and Vishy Anand, Anand actually played the move knight a6 and ended up winning the game quite nicely. But I prefer this line with c5 a little bit. And what happens here is white usually pushes this pawn, and you end up with a little bit of craziness where white ends up giving a check to this king, the king steps to d8, and you have this really interesting position where if you count, the pawns are actually even, but the black king is a little bit stuck in the center. What does black have in exchange for this? Well, pretty natural development with these bishops, and he's ahead a little bit in development compared to all of white's pieces on their starting squares. He also has this nice central e4 pawn, and I quite like this for black, actually. The main move is bishop c4, and you can respond to this with a really nice knight b4 idea here. The point being, if takes, queen takes, picks up this bishop. So I went through that one rather fast here. Oh, and sorry, Ben Simon told me that there was a question I had to answer because there's a $2 donation. Which opening's better, Caro-Kann or French defense? I think you'll know my opinion on that. The French is for losers. The Caro-Kann is for winners. Do what you will with that information. So we went through that pretty quickly here. Just to back up, the key point is knight fg1 threatens to trap the knight. f6 gives the knight a square. White's now committed really to this f3 idea. We go to g5, the only square available. Takes, takes. f4, you can go to either square. I prefer the move knight e4. White challenges this knight, and we develop with bishop d7. Now white can take, we can take back, c3, and I like the move c5 rather than the knight a6 that Vishy chose. So you just develop a little bit, immediately challenge the center, and with your king, you're actually going to run to the c7 square and just develop your pieces, create a nice little fortress around your king. And black is doing more than fine. Okay, so that is perhaps, the most forcing line from white here. White plays the move knight fg1, threatening to trap the knight. That's when you go in for this f6 idea. The more common move, perhaps the better move, is actually just to play knight g3, hitting this knight directly. Now there are a couple things you can do. You could take off this knight immediately, opening the h-file, but the better move is really just to play c5 here, directly challenging the center. White doesn't really have time to take, because you can take back, and d4 would fall. So instead, the move bishop d3 is the most common, hitting this knight again. Now if you take on d4, well, it's fine, but you're going to get met with something like this, and d4 might be a little bit difficult to hold on to, actually. So instead, after bishop d3, most common is to take on g3, h takes g3, and take on d4. So what happens now? Well, white gets this active rook on the h-file and good coordination on the king side. In return, black is crashing through in the center and has already won this pawn. There are now a few different moves we're going to take a look at from here, but this is more or less the starting position of the main line in this Caro-Kann. So what's going on here? Well, basically in all the lines, black is going to look to develop in some manner. Usually these are the squares the pieces come to. This bishop also can come to e7 to keep an eye on the g5 square, but generally knight c6, bishop d7, and bishop e7 or c5, depending on the line. This is kind of what you want to be doing with the black pieces. Note that castling kingside, sometimes it comes on the board, rarely it does though. This kingside is really going to come under fire, and you have to be really careful if you're committing your king to this side of the board. Why don't we just take a look at some lines though. So knight takes d4. The most common move in the database here is actually knight g5, just directly threatening this h7 pawn. How should black respond? Well, you counter the attack on the side with development and attacking in the center. So simply knight c6. White can take this pawn if he likes, but simply bishop d7. And black is going to get developed. And this gets into some really crazy stuff in our main game here. So I'm going to come back to this, actually, because this is our main line. This is what was played in the game between Ponkatrov and Shimonov here. So let's back up a little bit. Knight g5 looks the most forcing, looks the most testing, but there are some other moves here for white. The move a3 has actually seen some play, just keeping an eye on the b4 square, and really, rather than preventing bishop c4, the move it's aimed at preventing is really bishop c5. It wants to reply to bishop c5 with the move b4 with tempo. It also is kind of acknowledging the fact that the black king often ends up on the queen side. It's kind of trying to get a head start on this pawn rush on the queen side for that eventual future date. Now the most common way to play here is what I'm going to recommend, simply knight c6, developing. b4 for white is the natural idea and continuation. Like I said, we simply develop our pieces now. The bishop comes to d7, the knight comes to c6. Bishop f4. Now h6 is the most common move for black here. In fact, the only move in this game in the database that I have here. So h6 is a nice idea to try and lock down some squares on this king side. g4 can come on the board. Queenside castles, as I said, black often puts the king over here. Now, the move g5 isn't really a threat here. You can simply take this and sacrifice the exchange, and this is going to be actually really good for black, because this exchange isn't even a sacrifice, excuse me, because of these threats on the king's side. Notes that this is a threat, and this is a threat, and if bishop g2, this is a threat. So the tactics work out here for black. So queenside castles, kingside castles is played in the game, and now simply g5 from black, bishop g3, and bishop e7. And in this game, this is a position from Solak against Elyanov, and they actually ended up drawing, but black is pretty significantly better in this position. You're just going to push through with h5 and open things up on this king's side. You have a nice central pawn advantage, and white has some work to do before getting back into this game. So, okay, that's a little side note on a3 for you. a3 goes for b4, but in the end, we're still just going to develop our pieces and play on the king's side as such. So that's a3. Now, perhaps the simplest line for white, there's this a3 line going for b4, there's knight g5 going for the king's side. What of course, if white simply recaptures this pawn on d4? What happens here? Well, of course, queen takes would be a mistake. The classic trap in the French defense in the Caro, bishop b5 check, picks up the queen. But the line I'm going to recommend is actually bishop c5, and this makes things rather awkward for the white player. Now, why is that? Well, natural is to defend this knight with c3. We're simply going to pile up the pressure with knight c6. Now, we are actually threatening to capture this knight. The move bishop e3 comes on the board, well, you're going to get met with bishop d7. And once again, we're threatening to capture this knight, we're threatening to capture e5, and things are going to start falling for white. So instead, white most often plays the move knight takes c6. Now, of course, this allows bishop takes f2. There's actually one game in this line here that white ended up winning, but I think black had a very, very nice position and was, in fact, winning out of the opening in this game that white ended up winning. And for those curious, this is Maltsevskaya against Sofer from 2017. There you go. Of course, white has to move out of the way with king f1. Black will recapture, and in the game, queen g4 was played. Bishop b7 was black's response. Note, taking this pawn is a little bit suicidal. Black will actually simply castle queenside, and these open files around the king are going to be more or less death for the white player. In the game, king e2 was played, and black missed a very nice move here, bishop g1, to solidify the advantage. Queen f3 might have to be played to guard against queen f2, and now there are many moves, but perhaps bishop a6 is the simplest, just removing the shelter around the white king here. Okay. Yeah, but in the game, of course, that was missed, and bishop c5 was played instead, leading to an equal position that white ended up winning. Okay, so that's a little side note on if knight takes d4. Now, if bishop e3, bishop d7, and then knight takes c6, trying to avoid this, well, we simply take on e3, and once again, we are going to have a nice advantage. This knight really has nowhere to go, and we're taking on f2 next, unless you play knight d4, which, of course, we can capture. So, once again, the three main moves here, a3, knight takes d4, and our main move in the game, knight g5. And they all end up more or less okay for black. So let's go back to the main line here with knight g5. Knight g5. Yeah, two knights against the Caro. We'll get back to the first few moves momentarily. But this is our main variation here between Pankratov and Shimonov. So knight g5 hitting this pawn. Of course, we're going to play knight c6. White is going to capture this pawn. That's really the only sensible continuation. Now bishop d7. And white to move and find a tactic. See if you can find a tactic for the white player here. It's not a difficult tactic, but it is a rather complicated one once you get into the variations. So white to move and win material for those of you at home here. Been playing the two knights for a while and have never seen this position before. As I said at the top of the show here, the two knights is kind of often overlooked by Caro-Kann players, and they play what I really think are slightly inferior lines with bishop g4 and with d takes e4 rather than what I consider the best move, 3 knight f6. So it's not as common to see from the white side, which should actually play in the black player's favor a little bit. Okay, of course, knight f6 is the quote-unquote tactic. Knight f6 checks the king and unveils this threat to the rook. Black, of course, should take this knight, and now rook takes h8. And what's going on here? Well, we're going to castle, making a threat. King f1 steps out of this threat, and now f takes e5. And we have a absolutely wild position here, where white is up in exchange for a pawn, technically. I believe that's the pawn count. It's a little bit difficult to see. But black has achieved 4 central pawns. That is correct. Count 4 central pawns. 4 of them. 4. That's I've never seen it before. So, okay, 4 central pawns. And there are actually 8 games in the database here. The one I'm going to take a look at was actually a game played by Ding Liren with black in the Chinese league, I think. His opponent, Yan Feng, that's a terrifying name, Feng, all right, played queen h5, hitting this pawn on f7, and Ding replied with e4. And the game between them actually continued for a bit, but with these central pawns, black is actually the one with an advantage here. For example, simply bishop e2, and in the game, Ding played bishop d6, which is perfectly fine. You can also play bishop e7. Stockfish says the best move is f6, but I don't really understand it, so I like simply bishop d6. Rook takes d8 was not played in the game. Simply a3 was played in the game, and e3 for black led to some interesting complications. So this is one that, I mean, you can analyze it as deeply as you like. It's a really, really complex position. Just know that black should actually have the edge with these central pawns. And there's going to be a lot of plans here. For example, you can go for the super pawn square in the center, occupying every central square. or this move e3 that Ding Liren came up with is actually quite nice. Additionally, there are some ideas of playing moves like bishop e8, and the point here is that after some move like bishop g5, well, you're gonna try and advance a little bit with moves like f6 and f5 in the near future. Let's say a more laid back move a little bit would be like a4. And okay, I don't actually like this move bishop e8. I like the move f5 immediately as well. The point being, Black's plan is eventually to expand in the center here. I threw in this bishop e8 move to try to do it with tempo, but you can simply just expand right away. Moves like f5, moves like e5, moves like e3. This is how Black should play this position. And if you get this in a game, I mean, good luck to you. It's a wild one. It's happened, like I said, around 8 times before. 8 times this position has been achieved by strong level players. So, okay. In the game, though, in our main game, this, of course, was not a Ding Liren game. The game we're looking at was Queen h5 was actually played, and this is much less common than King f1. 8 games, King f1. This is the only game where Queen h5 was played, and Black simply takes back on e5. No need to do anything wild and crazy. You don't really need to memorize this line. Just play natural moves. You take and try to expand in the center. Let's see the natural conclusion of this game, though. Bishop g5 was played, hitting this rook, and now is the time to play with some activity. Queen takes b2 for Black, hitting the rook. Rook d1, saving the rook. Now bishop b4 is a check. King f1. Black takes off this rook on h8 as it was attacked here. Queen takes h8, and simply king c7. The game continued now with c3, and d takes c3, and Black is simply winning here. c3 is a losing move, although, like I said, Black does have some advantage. Perhaps queen g7 is a better try when, like I said, Black is going to start expanding with moves like f5. And this little pawn glob is going to run up the board and try and kill White. Black is also more or less just winning on the queen side as well. And moves like a5, a4, a3, a2, a1 are also going to become threats if this a pawn ends up falling. Okay, in the game though, c3, and now after d takes c3, this passed pawn is simply too much. And Shimonov won this game pretty easily here. Bishop b2, and now queen a1 check. Now queen d1 is a fork. Rook takes b2, pawn takes b2, queen h7, and e4 interferes with this connection. Bishop f4 check, e5 now. Note, backup center pawns are always good too. And here, White actually resigned. So very nice game from Black. And this is why I really like this variation for Black. All of the lines look really fun to play and pretty complex as well. But the difference is, for most Black openings that look really fun to play and really complex, Black usually ends up worse. You know, maybe you can play like the Najdorf, it's really complex and fun and you're like equal, but in these lines, White is the one who ends up on the back foot because the 2 knights really, I don't think is the best line for White. So with these main lines for Black, I really like his chances here, and White can very, very easily end up on the back foot. So just to recap here, the main line I just showed, e4, c6, knight c3, d5, knight f3, the 2 knights variation of the Caro-Kann. The main 2 moves here are bishop g4 and d takes e4, but I'm recommending the 3rd most popular move, knight f6. I think this is the best line for Black. e5 is the only line worth considering, knight e4 now, and these are the main moves for White. In this game, we're looking at all the lines after knight e2, when queen b6 is the move to hit f2, force this pawn to d4, and now e6, and you end up with some really interesting stuff where Black is attacking in the center of the board. Just to quickly play through the main line once again, knight g3, c5, attacking the center, bishop d3, we trade knights and take in the center. And then we looked at these 3 main options for White, and the plans for Black were similar in each. You develop your pieces out, castle queenside, or in the main line, you know, go wild and tactically get this massive pawn center. So that is the main variation of the 2 knights that I'm going to go over. Now, backing up to this starting position here, we're going to look next at the line with d4. But first, this was a lot to cover. I'm going to open it up to any questions to the YouTube chat before I move on. This knight e2 line is honestly the most critical, and might not be the most common move that you actually face. In the database, it's the most common. In practice, I've actually run into d4 a lot more than knight e2. But open it up to questions, because this line is really, really critical and really complex as well. Why castle queenside? That's a perfectly good question. So in the knight g5 line, it's pretty obvious why you castle queenside. Your kingside kind of falls apart. But looking at another line like a3 here, well, why are you going to castle queenside? The fact is, g5, if you end up, let's say black plays a little bit more naively, simply bishop e7, that's not a bad move at all, and white plays a move like king f1. Now if we castle kingside, a move like g5 is simply winning. Bishop takes h6 is probably winning. Queen d2 preparing bishop takes h6 is probably winning. Let me flip on the engine here. It looks like it's plus 6.5. So don't castle kingside in this line. You're just going to get destroyed by this open h file. That's why you'll want to go queenside. The open h file is way too dangerous. Any other questions? What about knight takes knight? Knight takes knight is not at all the most popular move here. We're going to take a look at it once we get to the sidelines here. We'll look at d4 next, though. Look at d4 next. Any other questions? Any other questions? Okay, so more questions about this sideline. We'll look at this sideline last. It's really not the most popular move, so let's move on to 4d4. To do so, we're going to take a look at our main game here between a player by the name of Naj, I hope I'm pronouncing correctly, and Peter Prohaska. Peter actually recently, I believe, moved to St. Louis. He's going to one of the St. Louis schools. I think it's Webster. Once again, we have the two knights, knight f6, e5, really the only move, knight e4. Now, in the last game, we took a look at knight e2. Now we're going to look at the d4 lines. And those are really, by far, the two most popular responses to this line with white. Just to give you some numbers, in the database I have here, there are 310 games with knight e2, there's 108 games with d4, and there's less than 40 games in every other variation. So d4, a really main line. Now, there are two moves that you can really play here. The most common move is actually knight takes c3, but I'm going to recommend the second most common move, queen a5. And now there are only 12 games in this queen a5 line, but I think it's simply an improvement on knight takes c3. The reason for that being, you quite often get similar positions to if you take on c3 immediately, but your queen is a little bit improved on the a5 square. That's my claim at least. So queen a5, and now the most common response to this is actually bishop d2, trying to highlight that this queen can't stay on a5. However, with bishop d2, the move knight takes d2 is what I'm going to recommend, and that's what was played in this game as well. And by taking off this dark squared bishop, the black king starts to feel a little bit safer. By removing this piece, you can much more comfortably play moves like h6 whenever you need to, and you have to worry less about these bishop takes h6 sacrifices. It's a really nice thing to kind of have off your mind. You know, bishop takes h6, never going to be legal in this game. So knight takes d2 in the main variation. I do want to mention the move bishop d3 is also actually playable, and it has been played a few times. Against this, I'm going to simply recommend normal development here. Bishop g4, threatening this knight on f3. Now, of course, if takes, we'll take back, and we're on this knight, so white most often castles. And now, knight takes c3 is the move. Of course, white has unpinned with his previous move. So knight takes c3, b takes c3, e6. Bishop d2 now is the most common move for white, making some threats like this, but simply bishop e7 for black. c4 can come on the board for white. We're going to drop this queen back to c7, and now after c takes d5, c takes d5, it's just simply a game here. This is more or less equal from what I can tell. It's kind of an improved French. We've got our bishop out of the pawn chain, and we do have some nice pressure on the queen side here. But of course, white's going to have some compensation for this with some play on the king side as well. White also has some ideas of playing this move c4, and in fact, in the only game I found in the database here, rook c1 was played, and bishop a3, rook b1 was black's choice, Black then repeated with bishop e7, and the players agreed to a draw after bishop e7, rook c1. There are other moves you can play, though. For example, simply knight c6 is totally playable, and after c4, you can reply with queen d7, and you might end up in some position looking like this, where you have some pressure on the d4 pawn, but white has a little bit more space. It's just kind of a balanced position. Okay, enough on bishop d3, though. I was just highlighting that you just end up taking on c3 eventually, playing e6, and you get your bishop out of the pawn chain first with a slightly improved French. Okay, though, bishop d2 is our main move. It's the most common move from white, so it's what we're going to focus on. In the game, Peter Prohaska takes this bishop off the board, as I'm recommending. Queen takes d2 was white's reply, and now simply bishop f5. And once again, we're simply aiming for an improved French here with bishop f5. However, the difference is this time white can kind of prevent it. White has this nice move, knight h4, hitting this bishop, and so the bishop has to drop back. You can kind of come out to g4, but really you're only helping white here. Moves like queen f4 are actually something white wants to do anyways. Moves like h3 are also on white's mind. So don't come to g4, simply drop back to d7. It's totally fine. Now in the game, white played bishop d3, black played e6, and white actually found nothing better than to drop this knight back to f3. So what have we achieved by this maneuver? Well, I think we actually gained a tempo by forcing white to move this knight a couple times, back and forth. Okay, now c5 comes on the board for black, and we just challenge the center. Very natural play, the classic kind of French plans here. So c5, challenging the center. White in the game actually kind of budged and took on c5. Black played knight a6, trying to recapture with the knight. Simply queen f4 from white. Queen b4 was black's choice, trying to get these queens off the board. Of course, most of white's play is coming on the king side in the form of a mating attack, so trading queens is always going to be a good idea here for black. Queen c1 was played in the game, guarding this pawn. Now knight takes c5, and things have really gone well for black in this game. Knight takes d3, rook c8. White now has two bishops, pressure on the c-file, and a very nice game. A very, very nice game ahead. I'm going to call this kind of the end of the opening, but we'll take a look at the rest of this game as well. Peter played a very nice game here. a3 was played, queen b6, queen f4, back, now bishop e7, just getting developed, queen g4. Once again, it would be a mistake to castle king side here. You're already actually hanging tactics like knight takes d5. So just leave your king in the middle, it's fine. And in fact, Peter could take on b2 here. White kind of went for broke with queen takes g7. Simply rook f8 is defending. Now knight takes d5 was played, but Peter simply goes up a piece now. Rook b1, queen takes a3, rook takes b7, queen a6, and this game quickly ended in Peter's favor. Queens were traded, and here black is simply up a rook and winning the game. King b6, h5, a5 was the last move of the game, and Peter walks away with a win. Okay, so I went through these lines a lot faster. They're a little bit simpler with d4. I see a little question, where was this played? I think this was a World Team Championship. I think it was a team championship. Tough to tell. It was played somewhere in the realm of 2013 to 2014. Perhaps nobody does know where this game came from. I just found it in the database. So any questions on d4? What's the bishop doing on d7? Okay. It's the centi pawn loss from white, 100 plus. I'm not super worried about the centi pawn loss. I'm worried more about the plans for each side and how each side should be playing. White actually played pretty naturally here, going for an attack on the king side, but black's play in the center and on the queen side is always going to be enough if played well. Why didn't queen take c3 after knight takes? c6, c5 losing in tempo is not bad, maybe. Well, in this case, we actually gain the tempo back by playing bishop f5 and bishop back to d7. And a little note on why it looks like we're playing the French down a tempo. Well, in this case, even if we were directly down a tempo, we would have gotten this very, very favorable exchange where we trade off our g8 knight, or f6 knight, depending on how you want to phrase it, for the dark squared bishop. This is a really favorable exchange for black, and so that's what black is getting by moving this knight out to f4 so early on, and playing c6 followed by c5, rather than c5 in one tempo. Note that also in this other line with bishop d3, where we end up taking on c3, we also have a slightly more favorable exchange. Now, some of you might be familiar with this pawn structure in French's. Of course, this pawn structure is normally achieved by bishop b4, followed by bishop takes c3. And we would much prefer to trade off our g8 knight for this knight on c3, rather than our dark squared bishop. So it's a more favorable exchange, and we also get this bishop outside the pawn chain. So that's why it's worth it here for black to waste a little bit of time with c6 and c5. Good question, though. Okay, why didn't queen take c3 after knight takes? I'm a little bit... Okay, here, I see. So bishop d2, well, I don't think we ever took on c3. I'm a little confused. Yeah, I'm a little confused by your statement. In the line with bishop d3, of course, queen takes c3 actually wasn't legal. We took the piece here, so queens don't move like knights. But, okay. Oh, I see what you're saying. Why not queen takes c3 here? Or perhaps you're saying, yeah, I guess you're saying here. Well, the answer is it's simply not worth the time to take here. Rook b1 is going to be a really strong move if you're not careful. And if you play a move like b5 to defend it, simply e6 now, and you're kind of getting destroyed. You got to be a little bit careful. Like bishop takes e6 is going to be met with knight g5, and this guy's attacked. Knight back to d7, queen f3, and all of a sudden pressure is kind of mounting. There's discovered threats. There's threats on f6. If you play a move like f6, well then bishop takes, or bishop g6 is picking up the queen. So things can get a little hairy pretty fast. So don't waste your time picking up this doubled pawn. You need to develop instead. Note that if a move like rook b1 is played now, it's perfectly fine. We drop the queen back to c7. And we stay a little bit more solid here. Just a little bit more solid. Okay, any other questions? Okay. Well, in that case, I am going to move on once again. First of all, actually, let me do a quick little review. So, in the first variation, we took a look at knight e2. Now we're looking at d4, when I'm recommending queen a5, hitting this knight. Most common move for white is bishop d2, where we take this bishop and then kind of develop into a normal French, where we have this favorable exchange. Bishop d3 is also playable, where we get this bishop outside the pawn chain once again, and end up taking this knight on c3. So just to play through it, bishop d2, we take the bishop, develop our bishop, play c5, and go for this attack in the center. D takes c5 was played in the game, knight a6 to recapture favorably. White goes for attacks on the king's side, we go for pressure on the queen's side, and due to the opening play, black's pressure on the queen's side is really more than enough here. Queen c1, knight takes c5, and black is already better. White could, of course, play other moves here, like even kingside castles is playable, maybe a move like a3, but simply knight takes c5. And once again, black's pressure in the center and on the queen side is going to be enough for him here. Okay, let's move on to some sidelines. So let's see, knight f6, e5, knight takes e4. Now there are a wide variety of sidelines here. I'm actually going to go over 5 different lines for white, kind of briefly here. I don't want to spend too much time on each of these, because these are really not the most common moves. Why don't we start with what some of you probably think is the most natural move, taking this knight on e4. That's probably what you're worried about with this variation when you first see it. So knight takes e4. Okay. Knight takes e4, d takes e4, of course. Our opponent took our knight, we're going to take it back. Knight g5 now is trying to pick up this pawn, but play from here for black is actually pretty natural. You simply play the move queen d5 and try to pick up this pawn. Note that d4 is a move for white. You simply take en passant, bishop takes, and take this pawn for free. White gets a little bit of development, but up a pawn, up a center pawn, nonetheless, this should be totally fine for black, and you can just kind of develop naturally with this knight, play a move like e6, and get this bishop out, and life is totally fine for black. The most common move, though, is queen e2. Queen takes e5 is playable here, but I'm actually going to recommend the move bishop f5, being a little bit more annoying to the opponent, really holding on to this e-pawn for dear life. Now, if white ends up really knowing what they're doing, they might play like a Chinese player by the name of Shenglei Lu with the move g4, hitting this bishop. And the point is after bishop to g6, bishop to g2 is the point, to pick up this pawn. Fear not, though. Now we're ready to capture on e5. Knight takes e4. But now the move h5 is quite nice for black. And g5 by white is already giving up a lot of light squares, such as f5. Bishop takes e4 is the most common move. Now, in the game between Shenglei Lu and Wei Yi, Shenglei actually played the move g6 here, which is a pretty interesting try to get at the black king. You can't really save this bishop anyway. In the game, Wei Yi tried f5, and the move f3 was played to take advantage of this pin. Knight d7 takes on e4, and here Wei Yi simply plays e6, takes on f5, queen takes f5, and this pawn's a little bit weak. The game continued with queen e4, and Wei Yi simply plays bishop c5. And the game continued from here, and that one actually ended in a draw. So this is perfectly fine for black. Black's, of course, going to end up castling queenside once again, and this pawn might just be a little bit overextended. As compensation, though, white has two bishops, and this e6 pawn isn't ideal either. Should be totally fine here. If you're curious, the game did continue with the move c3, queen takes e4 check, bishop takes e4, knight over to f6, bishop c2, and e5. So black gets a little bit of an edge in the center as well. Okay, so that's what happens on knight takes e4. Any questions there? So knight takes e4, we take back and play queen d5. Now there's really no way for white to hold on to this pawn. We looked at d4 when we simply take it off the board and take e5. We also looked at queen e2 when I'm recommending bishop f5, where you go in for a slightly weird looking line, but you eventually just take this anyways. Perfectly fine stuff. Perfectly fine stuff. Please get a new haircut. I want to, but the world's ending and all the haircut places are closed. Trust me, dude, I want a haircut. It's not happening. Okay, that's enough on knight takes e4 then. And to be totally honest with you, I very rarely have faced knight takes e4 in my own games here. Most white players kind of understand that knight takes e4 is not the way to go against this line. Now, let's look at what I'm going to call the most relevant sideline, which is, well, actually, let's look at that later. We'll look at our main variation last. Let's start with queen e2 here. Queen e2 is a move that has been played 30 times. It's like the 4th or 5th most common reply for white. And to show you how to play this way, I'm going to actually go over a game here between Jan Nepomniachtchi and legendary player Anatoly Karpov with the black pieces. Now, in this game, Anatoly actually ended up losing to Jan with the white pieces, but he had a very nice position out of the opening, so that's what we really care about. Don't be deceived by the results of the games all the time. Knight takes c3 is black's reply. D takes c3. Now Karpov, Caro-Kann legend, plays bishop g4. Of course, develop the bishop outside the pawn chain. You're playing the Caro-Kann. Okay, h3 from white forces black's hand here. Bishop takes f3 is played. Queen takes f3, and now simply e6. And we get this interesting position. White has the two bishops, more space in the center, and as always, he's going for an attack on this king side. Meanwhile, black has a slightly better pawn structure, more control over the d4 square, and pretty natural development. So let's see how the game continued. Pretty much exactly as you might expect. Bishop f4, knight d7, challenges the center, supports c5, queenside castles, and then Anatoly came up with this nice move, b5, just immediately going after white on the queen side. h4 was played, and now a very common response to h4 in the Caro-Kann is actually this move h5, just to lock things down a little bit on the king side. However, of course, white can break through anyways with the move g4, which is what Jan did in the game. H takes g4, queen takes g4. Queen c7 is a perfectly fine move, challenging this pawn. Rook e1 from white defends, and this is where Anatoly started going a bit wrong. He has a perfectly fine position here. In fact, I think black is actually a little bit better. In the game, Anatoly castled queenside, which is not an awful move, but it's a little bit better, actually, to just keep this king in the center and just launch these pawns up the board and go after white on the queen side. And it's going to be a really, really fun game. Opposite sides castling, you know, somebody's getting checkmated here. It's going to be a good time. So that's what I'm recommending against queen e2. Basically, your fallback against most of these lines is you take on c3, develop this bishop, and then play a Caro-Kann type position where white often castles queenside, and you can go after him with an attack. This is kind of the fallback for this line. So that's queen e2. Why don't we take a look now at the move h3? And you might think this move is stupid, and why would white play this move? Well, if you've been paying attention, and all the lines we just looked at, like queen e2, what does black do here? Well, they move the bishop out to g4. So the idea of h3 is to kind of stay a little bit cagey and simply prevent bishop g4 before black ever has the chance. Now there are a couple things you can do here. I'm just going to recommend e6. You know, give up on bishop g4, give up on developing this bishop, because thankfully we've forced white's hand into kind of wasting a tempo with this move h3. So that's what we get in exchange for keeping our bishop behind the pawns here. So queen e2 could be played, and now knight takes c3, d takes c3, sorry, d takes c3, not queen d3. And the move c5 is going to come for black. And once again, it's going to be a very, very similar position to what I just looked at. The difference here being these knights are still on the board. It's a slight difference, but it shouldn't make too much of a difference in the game. Queen c7, for example, g4, knight c6 even, and in this game, white actually tried c4 and d takes c4. And black is actually significantly better already. e5 is coming under some fire, and moves like b5 are on the cards for black if white doesn't recapture here. So this was actually another game between Shenglei Liu and Ding Liren that they played. I guess they played the Caro-Kann a couple times and went for a couple interesting different lines. So that's h3. Once again, you just take on c3, but the difference with h3 is that it doesn't let black develop this bishop. Not too different. Okay, let's look at another line here. What if d3, challenging the knight? I'm going to let you viewers at home guess the next move for black here. You should have some idea of what black's fallback is against all these weird looking lines. So d3, what do you want to play? What do you want to play here? Okay. There's a bit of a delay. I'm going to assume the chat all said knight takes c3 because they've been paying very good attention. Of course, this is our fallback, and then we develop this bishop and play a French style of position. So I think you can kind of guess black's next 5 moves. White takes here, black develops this bishop. White challenges the bishop, we trade on f3, play e6, and then in this game, black chose queen c7 before playing a move like c5. It's perfectly fine now. Bishop d3, c5, castles, knight c6, bishop e3, bishop e7, queen g3, and in this game, black went for g6. And black is perfectly fine here. The game continued with rook a to b1, and here black made a little bit of a misstep by playing the move a6. Black did go on to win this game, though. This is a game between Paulette and Berg in 2014. Yeah, they're, you know, some mid-level strong players. c4 would actually be a better move for black here, forcing this bishop back. And then a move like h5 kind of locks things down on the king's side. Note, once again, black is not committing the king to castling king's side in any of these lines. Don't do it. You'll get checkmated. It hurts really bad. It's happened to me. Learn from my mistakes. Okay. So yeah, d3 is okay for white, but we just go back to this fallback plan. Lastly now, I want to take a look at the main variation that involved the players you see on your screen here, Levon Aronian and Ding Liren. Bishop e2 is actually the most common of these quote-unquote sidelines that I've decided to analyze here today. Once again, you can probably guess our next move. That's right, we're falling back to knight takes c3. Knight takes c3, d takes c3, and now bishop g4. The same moves we've been looking at. Now, why is bishop e2 the most common of these sidelines? Well, the reason for that is that now, after bishop e2, the knight is not actually pinned, and white can force perhaps a slightly more favorable trade of the two light-squared bishops rather than the light-squared bishop for this knight. This knight is actually a really good piece and can often be involved in sacrifices to get at the king to open things up. So white keeps the knight in favor of trading off these bishops, as did Levon Aronian in this game against Ding Liren. The game continued with e6. You have to kind of stop e6 for white, and just the natural moves that we've been looking at all day long here in these sidelines. Now queen g4 for white is putting some pressure on the g-pawn. Simply knight d7 is played, challenging e5. Knight back to f3 defends. And then Ding Liren came up with a really nice move here to displace the queen. That move, of course, I'm talking about is simply h5. Now in this game, white chose to bring the queen to f4, and black perhaps missed a little bit of an opportunity here to take the initiative. So let's see if you all at home can find an interesting way to take the initiative with black to try and create some immediate problems for white. See if you can find it. See if you can find it. I'm talking to you at home. Have I ever beaten an IM or a GM? Yes. Why does white not play b takes c3, like taking towards the center? B takes c3 is actually a playable move, but it really just transposes to those d4 lines we were talking about. So I'll review that briefly though. But for now, interesting way for black to take the initiative. Does anybody see it? Nobody seems to see it. Okay, well here's the answer for those of you at home. I'm, of course, talking about this weird-looking move, queen c7. Now, what is attained by this? Well, white's going to probably play a natural move like castles or a4. It doesn't really matter. Let's say castles. And now black can reply it with f6. And you're really solving these problems in the center immediately. f6, interesting move. E takes f6. Black can go for a queen trade, take back on f6, and after a move like g3, simply king f7. And black has a nice advantage in the center of the board here. And really no problems with this king now that the trade has been forced. So that would have been a nice line for black. Instead, Ding Liren kind of did the classical Caro-Kann play of playing. Now, for those of you unfamiliar, a huge advantage to the Caro-Kann is that black doesn't really create many weaknesses, if any at all. And Ding Liren chose to take that to heart in this game and really played the rest of the game with simple piece maneuvering, not really committing to any pawn pushes, any pawn thrusts, and it worked to his benefit here because white could not find a way to break through. h4 was played in the game. Now knight f8 is black's maneuver. Queen g3, knight g6. All of a sudden, pressure on this pawn. Bishop to g5 was played. Now queen c7 is putting some pressure here. Once again, moves like f6 are kind of being threatened, so bishop takes e7. Now queen takes e7. Queenside castles. Once again, not going kingside. Rook he1. And then Ding Liren came up with a really nice maneuver, actually. Queen f8 was his choice. And the point of this move is it simply defends g7. White played rook d3, but now with g7 defended, black improves his knight to this nice f5 square. Quite simply. Really natural play from Ding. Knight d4 was played, and now g6 solidifies this knight over here on f5. Queen g5 was played in the game, queen h6 trades the queens, and now after g3, rook h8, knight f3, king d7, c4, king e7. Black gets the king to the center for the endgame, rook a3, rook a8. Ding Liren even refuses to give his opponent the move a6, refuses any weaknesses at all. c5 now, b6, rook c3, and d4 was finally played. Ding finally pushes a pawn here. Rook a3, now rook hb8, rook a4, and Ding takes off this pawn on c5, plays rook b5, and at the end of the day, this ended up being agreed to a draw here with Ding up a pawn. And this is a game from actually the St. Louis Rapid and Blitz. I think this was a Rapid game though, in 2019, just last year. I think that was Ding's first appearance in that tournament actually. So Ding uses the Caro-Kann, achieves a draw. Now, there was a question I promised I would go over. Knight e4, bishop e2. Why doesn't white recapture with the b pawn, taking towards the center? And of course, this is actually an okay way of playing, excuse me, but we're simply going to transpose to a lot of the lines with d4. So let's go back to this line. For example, if white plays d4 here, we take on c3. In this line with bishop d3, knight takes c3 is eventually played. First bishop g4, castles, now knight takes c3, and you get this kind of structure that we looked at before. Once again, black gets kind of an improved flank with this bishop outside the pawn chain, and these knights exchanged with the dark squared bishop still on the board. And the plans are still black plays on the queen side. Natural stuff. Any other questions on the two knights variation of the Caro-Kann? I hope this was mostly comprehensive. This should be most of the stuff you guys face if you decide to employ this variation with black over the board, or even in online chess. Once again, the main ideas for black, really, you just try to get an improved type of French position where you bring this knight to e4, trade it off for this knight on c3, and just play chess from there. It's just a chess game. Okay, I'm not seeing any other ideas. Any other questions, really? Pawn hanging on c3. Well, yeah, once again, you don't really want to take this pawn. It's a little bit dangerous to go pawn hunting here. A little bit dangerous. In fact, bishop d2 is the main move. But for example, rook b1, you just drop back to c7. It's fine. It's fine. Okay. Well then, that's going to be it for me tonight on Chess Openings Explained. If you're watching live, be sure to head over to our Twitch channel, where the action will still continue with a fun little tactics time class that I have for you guys. If you're watching the YouTube replay, well, thank you very much for watching. Either way, no matter how you're watching, be sure to tune in next week for another Chess Openings Explained with yours truly, Caleb Denby. I will see you then. Goodbye.